Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to episode 9 of Stewarts Soundbites. I am joined today by Sheri Taylor. I'm absolutely delighted to have Sheri today. I was just telling her before we started this, actually, that I stalked her a bit on Twitter before asking her to come on today. So if you haven't seen her Twitter, do look. It's very, very interesting. So Sheri's joining us. Sheri's a registered dietitian. And she is the Director of Specialist Nutrition Rehab. Sheri's going to speak to us today about a really niche topic that I myself hadn't really given much thought to until I saw one of her blog posts, which is the link between pain and nutrition. Sheri's going to do this in a presentation style, and I'm going to hand over because I'm conscious I'm eating into your precious time, Sheri. So I'll hand over to you.
So welcome, everyone. I know when you think of pain and pain management, nutrition, food, and weight are probably not the first things that pop into your mind, but there is a significant link between the foods that you eat and how your body experiences pain, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So there are two main things that I want you to take away from today's presentation. The first is that I want you to know the types of pain that could benefit from dietary changes. And the second is what is exactly the link between eating habits and pain. So to answer the first question, what kind of pain could benefit from dietary changes? Well, there's three main types. The first is any kind of inflammatory pain. The second is neuropathic pain. And the third would be any kind of abdominal pain. So what I'm going to do now is explain each of those in a little bit more detail and actually explain the link between how food, nutrition, and weight have an impact. So we're going to start with inflammatory pain, for example. So this could be as a result of a trauma, musculoskeletal injury, osteoarthritis, or even rheumatoid arthritis. And there's two main sort of diet and lifestyle. Sorry, I'm just having trouble advancing the slide. There we go. There's two main ways that diet and lifestyle have an impact on inflammation. So the first is the impact on obesity and how that affects inflammation. And the second is how the type of fat that you eat has an impact on inflammation. So we're going to talk about obesity first. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this because it's probably the most important thing that I want you to take away from today's presentation. So it's important to understand that obesity in and of itself creates a chronic level of inflammation in the body, okay? And I'll explain in a minute how that happens. But you now have this person that already has a chronic level of inflammation in their body, and we are now adding some kind of trauma or injury or something else that's also causing inflammation. So you actually end up with sort of a stacking effect. So you have a certain amount of inflammation already. We're adding the inflammation from the trauma or injury on top of that, and you're getting a higher inflammatory response than what would happen if the person wasn't carrying excess weight, okay? Now, how exactly does obesity cause inflammation? Well, it's important. I'll use an analogy because that's probably the easiest way to explain it. So if you think of your fat cells a bit like a calorie bank account, and any time that you eat a little bit more than what your body needs, your body will convert those calories to fat and store it in your fat bank account. And if there's a day when you're a bit rushed, you skip a meal, or you don't get to eat as much as what you'd like, or in the middle of the night when your body needs a bit more energy, your body will make a withdrawal from that fat bank account and burn those calories for energy, okay? And if the deposits and the withdrawals sort of balance out, then your weight will stay the same. What happens after a catastrophic injury quite often is that after the initial 3 to 6 month period, clients then start to slowly increase their weight, and many become overweight and obese as a result. And that's due to changes in their metabolic rate. But when that happens, obviously they're making a lot of deposits into their fat bank account and not very many withdrawals. Now, your body does its very best to sort of cope with that. So it will start to stretch the fat cells to make a little bit more room so that you can fit a little bit more fat inside. The fat cells will start to multiply. So it's like you've got multiple fat bank accounts going on at the same time. Or the third thing that happens is that some of that fat starts ending up being stored in places that fat was actually never designed to be stored, such as in your liver or in your muscles, for example, okay? So when your fat cells start to become bigger and start to multiply, they actually start to emit little SOS signals called inflammatory cytokines that sort of prime the immune response, let them know that something's just not quite right and it better be ready just in case bad things start to happen. And there comes a point when these fat cells begin to burst or begin to die. And when that happens, the white blood cell macrophages sort of swoop in and start to clean up some of the damage. And when those white blood cell macrophages swoop in, they also emit much stronger SOS signals to the rest of the body, triggering off an inflammatory response, okay? Similarly, when we have fat kind of stored in muscles and liver and places where fat was really never supposed to be stored, it sort of crowds out some of the healthy cells that are supposed to be in there, causes damage to the cells, cause some of those cells to die. And again, that also triggers off the inflammatory response. So that is how obesity actually increases inflammation. Now, the other thing that has a massive impact on all of this is the type of fat that people eat. Okay, so if someone is eating a lot of oily fish, for example, foods high in omega-3, any fat that you eat actually gets kind of put into the walls of the cells in your body. Okay, and so we need a certain amount of fat in our diet in order to accomplish that function, and that's fine. But it's the type of fat that you're storing in the walls of the cell that's quite important. So if you're eating lots of omega-3 fats, those cell walls are very pliable, very flexible. They transfer the signals really nicely, and things work the way that they should. But if someone's eating a lot of fast food and takeaway, foods high in saturated fat, trans fat, even high in certain types of vegetable oil, such as corn oil, and when those fats get put into the wall of the cell, it makes the cell a little bit more rigid, makes the signals not really work quite as well, and much more likely to trigger off an inflammatory response. So because of all of that, then, if we're looking for solutions to the problem, then we need to be looking at, obviously, if we can prevent clients from gaining weight in the first place. Prevention is always better than a cure anyways. But if you have clients that have gained a significant amount of weight, even if they're able to lose 5 or 10% of their body weight, that has been shown to be clinically significant enough to reduce levels of inflammation in the body, okay? The other strategies that clients can use is to increase the omega-3 fats that they're eating. So omega-3 is found in oily fish, for example, mackerel, sardines, salmon. It's also found in flaxseed, chia seeds, soybeans, and rapeseed oil. Okay, so any of those would be fantastic sources of omega-3. Now, if you happen to have clients that maybe don't like any of those foods, then we'd probably be looking at some type of omega-3 supplement. But you do need to be aware that to get enough of the active ingredient in order to be effective, you typically need more concentrated doses than what you would find in most supermarket supplements, okay? The other thing that's been found really effective in terms of inflammation is a Mediterranean or plant-based diet. So lots of vegetables and fruit, whole grains, nuts, olive oil, for example. And what we know is that the natural plant chemicals that are in those foods also help to prevent any damage to the cells that are going on. And so they have sort of a synergistic effect. They work hand in hand with the omega-3 fats in order to reduce cell damage and reduce inflammation in the body. Okay, so that's how food, nutrition, and weight has an impact on inflammatory pain. What about the second kind of pain? What about neuropathic pain? And I was able to find research around the link between diet and spinal cord injury clients, diabetic neuropathy, and alcoholic neuropathy as well. So in neuropathic pain, again, there's a couple of things going on. So the first is that obviously there's been damage to the nerves. Now, this could be as a result of a trauma, in which case there maybe isn't a whole lot that we can do to repair the damage. But there's other kinds of neuropathic pain that is preventable, and that they could be from like vitamin deficiencies, for example, so such as vitamin B12 deficiency. So if that occurs for a long period of time, it actually causes damage to the nerves, permanent damage to the nerves, which can then trigger off neuropathic pain. Thiamine deficiency would be another example, common in people that struggle with alcohol abuse. The other thing that has a massive impact is blood sugar levels. So if you have clients that have diabetes, you would be astonished the number of clients that I see under the GP on medication for diabetes that are still allowed to run with blood sugars far too high. So if their blood sugars are regularly above 10, then those high blood sugar levels are actually causing permanent damage to the nerves in the body. And that client is going to end up with neuropathic pain down the road. So it's really important that we prevent neuropathic pain as much as is possible. Now, what if in the case of spinal cord injuries, obviously we couldn't prevent that from happening, it's happened. Then we want to focus on the sensitivity of the pain receptors. And what we know is that when there's high amounts of inflammation in the body, that actually makes the pain receptors more sensitive to stimuli. Okay, so something that maybe otherwise wouldn't cause pain is now causing pain in these individuals. And because of what I've already explained in terms of the effect of diet on inflammation, the same then applies here to neuropathic pain. So there was a study done on clients with spinal cord injuries with neuropathic pain. They focused a lot on an anti-inflammatory diet and found that that was incredibly beneficial. So again, we're focusing on choosing a Mediterranean or a plant-based diet and increasing the omega-3 fats. Now, I would also assume that obesity and excess body fat would also have a role, but I actually wasn't able to find a whole lot of research on that specifically. I think that's very much in the early stages. So that's a hypothesis at the moment. Now, the third kind of pain is really where dietitians spend a lot of time, and that's on abdominal pain. And do not underestimate the impact that excruciating abdominal pain will have on your client's rehab and recovery, okay? It is very hard to engage in physio. It's very hard to engage in psychology if you're in excruciating abdominal pain. And abdominal pain has a multitude of causes. So the two most common reasons I would see in the community would be irritable bowel syndrome and constipation. And sometimes that constipation is a result of the pain medication that the clients are taking to try and manage their neuropathic or inflammatory pain. So it's a bit of a vicious cycle. Other things that can affect abdominal pain include food allergies or intolerances, celiac disease, inflammatory bowel disease, diverticular disease. There's quite a long list, actually. So there's a couple of triggers for abdominal pain. It could be structural damage, so like an ulcer in the stomach or in the intestine. It could be inflammation of the lining of the gut. It could be stretching or pressure from a buildup of gas or constipation in the gut. You can have pain from contractions, and either the person is maybe more sensitive to just the normal gut contractions, or maybe they're taking a laxative that is causing artificially strong contractions that can be quite painful. And finally, we know that the abdomen is like a second brain. And so any kind of stress or emotion can have an impact on how the gut functions. So the solutions then are very contingent on exactly what the problem is. And since the symptoms can often be quite similar, dietitians and GPs spend a lot of time trying to figure out exactly what the cause of the problem is and then treat it accordingly. So potential options would be adjusting somebody's fiber intake. So say if somebody had Crohn's or ulcerative colitis and they were having a really massive flare-up, we'd probably reduce their fiber intake. But if they were in remission, then we'd probably increase their fiber intake. Or clients with irritable bowel syndrome usually respond really nicely to soluble fiber, so the fiber in oats and flaxseed, for example, but don't respond quite as well typically to bran. So we can manipulate either the amount or the type of fiber in order to get symptom relief for many of the clients. We also want to make sure that they're taking an adequate amount of fluid so that there's no dehydration, because that can have a massive impact on constipation. And that's a very common issue that I find with clients and one that's quite easy to manage. The next thing I would use for clients with IBS would be something called a low FODMAP diet. So that's an evidence-based diet for people with IBS, where we sort of limit the amount of certain starches and sugars that are naturally found in food. We do that a period for sort of 4 to 8 weeks. And then once their gut has kind of calmed down, then we do 11 food challenges to try and figure out exactly what the person is reacting to. And then they can go back to a mostly normal diet, just limiting those 1 or 2 things that they know they have a reaction to. I have had phenomenal success with clients who have had excruciating abdominal pain and unable to engage in other forms of rehab when unmanaged IBS was the problem. And in fact, in one case, the IBS pain was actually triggering off his neuropathic pain. So once we got the IBS managed, he actually had much less impact of neuropathic pain as well. Other options would be eliminating certain gluten if somebody had celiac disease, for example, and we can look at probiotics, which are like adding healthy bacteria to the gut if we think that maybe there's an imbalance in there, maybe has too much of the unhealthy bacteria and not enough of the good stuff. All right, so my parting thoughts would be you have to nourish to flourish. So if we want clients to kind of get the most out of rehab, I would really encourage you to think of food, nutrition, and weight as maybe an adjunct to any other kind of pain management strategy that your clients are using. It's very complementary. There's really no risk or side effects associated with it. And it's something that clients can take personal responsibility for, and it's actually something that's within their control. And sometimes that's something that they really respond nicely to. So here are my contact details. Now, I believe Emma is going to share the blog post that I wrote on diet and pain, so that you have all the links to the research articles that I've used as sort of the basis for this presentation. I also write a free monthly electronic newsletter for solicitors, case managers, and allied health professionals on a variety of topics relating to nutrition and catastrophic injury. So if you'd like to sign up for that, you can do so on my website. Otherwise, if there's anything else I can do to help, or if you have any questions, then please get in touch. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sheri. If you wouldn't mind ending your screen sharing, then I find that really interesting, and there's loads of food, I hate the pun, but food for thought. There's loads to think about there, and loads of stuff that people don't naturally think of, particularly in acute stages of rehab post-injury. So thank you very much for that, Sheri. It was absolutely brilliant. It made me feel really bad about my cappuccino and custard creams this morning as well, but it was really, really helpful. Thank you. And as Sheri says, we're going to post the link to the blog post about this topic onto the end of the recording. That'll be available from tomorrow, but if anybody wants that sooner or they're desperate, just send me an email. And if anyone, as Sheri said, if anyone has any specific queries, do send them in. So next week we've got Tom Quick, who is a consultant orthopedic surgeon specialising in peripheral nerve injury. It's a pre-recorded session, actually, we've already done it. It was about brachial plexus injuries after catastrophic trauma, and that'll be a really interesting one, so please do tune in, and thank you all very much for joining.
Thank you.